So what happens when one of the world's most influential philosophers argues that it should be okay to kill disabled infants, and then comes face to face with a brilliant disability rights activist who was once one of those very infants? Okay, let's dive into this incredibly intense and deeply personal intellectual clash.
Just let that sink in for a minute. That quote is from Harriet McBryde Johnson, and this isn't some abstract thought experiment. She's talking about a real conversation, a real debate about her own right to exist. It's the kind of statement that just stops you in your tracks, and it immediately shows you the unbelievable stakes of this whole discussion.
On one side, you've got Harriet McBryde Johnson, an author, an attorney, and a really fierce activist who lived with a severe disability. And on the other side, Peter Singer, a hugely celebrated and yet very controversial professor of bioethics at Princeton. We're talking about two brilliant minds locked in a debate that just couldn't be more personal for one and more, well, logical for the other.
To really understand this debate, we've got to unpack the philosophy behind Singer's argument. It's a position that's built on what Johnson herself described as a tight string of syllogisms.
See, Singer's entire worldview is built on this foundation: preference utilitarianism. The basic idea is that the most ethical choice is always the one that satisfies the preferences, the wants and desires of the greatest number of people. It's all about maximizing happiness and fulfillment.
So how does that lead to a shocking conclusion? Well, here's the logic. First, he argues a newborn isn't a person in a philosophical sense because it doesn't have self-awareness or preferences yet. So he claims the moral line between a late-term abortion and killing a newborn is blurry. And since most parents prefer to have a healthy baby, Singer concludes that allowing them to, quote, replace a disabled infant with a non-disabled one would fulfill the most preferences. It's a horrifying conclusion, but the logic is consistent if, and this is a big if you accept his starting point.
Okay, so now let's flip over to Harriet McBryde Johnson's powerful counter-argument. You see, her response isn't built on these neat philosophical steps, but on the profound reality of her own life.
Johnson challenges the very heart of Singer's whole premise. She asks, is a person with a disability really worse off? I mean, his entire argument depends on the idea that disability automatically means less happiness, which would make it a reasonable preference for parents to want to avoid it.
And her rebuttal is just this powerful defense of that lived experience. She says, hey, people with disabilities build rich, satisfying, and uniquely valuable lives. We're not worse off, we're just different. We experience our own unique pleasures, and we contribute something to the world that it desperately needs.
And this is where the story gets truly fascinating. Because despite finding his views totally monstrous, Johnson also found Singer himself to be a reasonable, respectful, and even likable person. And this created a huge puzzle for her.
Her friends and family were just peppering her with questions. Was he grossed out by you? How did he treat you? But that last question, that was the big one. The one she tried to avoid at first. How can this guy value animal life so much and some human lives so little? Her eventual answer is so revealing. She actually admitted that inside Singer's own conceptual world, his logic, well, it holds together. It makes a terrifying kind of sense. But it was a world she flat out refused to enter. So the big question is, what defines that world?
Both Peter Singer and Harriet McBryde Johnson were atheists. They were both operating from the exact same foundational premise, that human life is just the result of a long, unguided evolutionary process, not some divine creation. This shared starting point is the absolute key to understanding their entire conflict.
And this just flips the whole script. From Singer's point of view, he was the one being logical and consistent. Given that they were both atheists, he was genuinely confused about how Johnson could disagree with what he saw as a totally reasonable view. In his world, her position was the one that didn't add up, not his.
So this leads us to the central argument of the essay that analyzes their whole debate. The problem isn't reason itself. The problem is the foundation that you build your reason on.
Reason is really just a tool. It's like a perfect calculator. It guarantees that if you put true numbers in, you'll get a true answer out. But if you start by putting in garbage, you can do perfect math and still get a garbage conclusion.
Just look at these two arguments. Both of them are perfectly logical. The conclusion follows from the first two statements. But that second argument is obviously nonsense, right? And why? Because its starting point, its first premise, all men are fish, is false. The logic is fine, the foundation is completely wrong.
So think about it like this. Your conclusions, what you believe, they rest on your reasoning. But that reasoning itself rests on your foundational beliefs, the core ideas you accept as true without needing proof. If that foundation is shaky, The whole structure on top of it is at risk, no matter how carefully you build it.
And this is the core takeaway from the source essay. The argument is that for Johnson to have logically refuted Singer, she didn't have to become irrational or illogical. She just needed a different foundation. The essay suggests that a foundation of theism, for example, which says all human life has inherent value, would provide the necessary starting point to rationally dismantle Singer's entire argument.
But in the end, without that different foundation, Johnson felt like her only option was to appeal not to logic, but to reality itself. She invoked the powerful, messy, undeniable truth of her own humanity and the rich lives of so many others with disabilities. It was an appeal from the heart, not the head.
The author of the essay we're drawing from, John Neely, he concludes with this powerful thought. The tragedy, he argues, wasn't Johnson's disability at all. It was that her own philosophical foundation, her atheism, prevented her from seeing a logical, rational path to defend the very human dignity that she so clearly embodied.
And that really just leaves us with a big question to ask ourselves. We all build our understanding of the world on foundational beliefs, whether we realize we're doing it or not. So, what are yours? And maybe more importantly, what conclusions do they logically lead you to?